Jude said, I'm Robbie Parks, and I'm a PhD student under supervision of Majid, and another supervisor in atmospheric physics, Ralph Toomey, and I'm a student here, obviously. And I'm going to be talking today about characterizing seasonal dynamics of mortality and population measures of how that can occur. And my study data set is the USA for the past sort of 30 years or so, and I've done a sort of early exploration into what climatic variables, i.e. temperature, might be or may not be driving what is happening and changing in seasonality as we go through. So just as a background, other studies in Europe have shown that higher winter mortality is observed, and that generally occurs in temperate countries, but that isn't also that's not just the simple picture. Certainly in Europe, from southern to northern Europe, they find that the magnitude, i.e. the sort of percentage difference between maximum and minimum mortality, is actually greater in sort of southern countries, where the temperature is perhaps less of a variation between maximum and minimum months in comparison to northern Europe. So there are other external factors other than climate which are perhaps posited to be involved there. But the reason I'm looking at my study in the way I've framed my study in this way is because there's limited research, as far as we know, to characterize how seasonal mortality is specific and behaves specifically to specific socioeconomic or age-sex profiles, and how that might be affected by local climate. And especially how it's changing over time. So one of the things I'm looking at, which is wavelet analysis, looks at the sort of the dynamic frequency spectrum over time and how that expresses itself from the data. So as I said, we're using all-cause deaths in the USA for the past 30 or so years, 32 I think, and we're using, among other things, wavelet analytical techniques. Just a summary of the data. It's an exhaustive list of mortality in the US, so it's over 70 million deaths. We've stratified by age, by mostly 10-year age groups, sex, state of residence, and month and year of death, so the month that you died in, basically, specifically. So I'll just go into briefly what wavelet analysis is. What you're looking at here is a national picture of women from 75 to 84. You're looking at death rates over time, so death per month, and you can see that there's an obvious seasonal pattern. But what I thought was interesting to look at is how is that changing over time, i.e. is there a seasonality that's emergent or disappearing, and if so, why that might be, or speculate why that might be. And so I can invoke something called wavelet analysis, which is essentially just a windowed Fourier transform, for those more technically minded, but it's essentially generating a frequency spectrum over time. And so what that is showing, the results of that are here, which you've got time again on the x-axis through my study period, and I've got a frequency spectrum slice as I go through time, and you're essentially seeing that it reflects quite well what the picture shows, in that there is a strong 12-month seasonality throughout this whole time period for this particular age-sex group. Now, the red indicates it's a significant. Sorry, the white lines indicate it's significant at 95%. And essentially, what you're seeing here is there hasn't really been a change, or in fact, there's been no change in this age group to the seasonality timing. But I don't assume necessarily that there is a 12-month seasonality before I do it. I just run the analysis and find out that it is at 12. So here are the results for the national picture. So this is first for men, and you can see this is for the youngest age group, so 0 to 4, and 85 plus. And if I just direct you towards the lower age groups, we're seeing there's pretty consistent 12-month seasonality over time for 45 and above. Now, other things to note is the 0 to 4 age group seasonality for all-cause mortality from 0 to 4 young boys has is attenuating and has sort of largely disappeared by the end of the study period, by 2013. Other things to note are that the men exhibit a seasonality at these sort of middle, sort of adolescent and young adult age groups, and you'll see that that might contrast, or it does contrast with women. And in fact, there is no significant seasonality at 12 months through the entire time period for 35 to 44-year-olds. Rather, there is actually a significant 6-month seasonality there. And if I look at women there, you can see that the bottom half of the age profiles are the same as the men, i.e. there is a seasonality or a difference between death rates within a year. It does vary at 12 months. For women, the picture is quite different for 5 to 34-year-olds, and in fact for 35 to 44, where it does emerge to have a significant seasonality at 12 months for women compared to men. Women and men behave pretty much exactly the same when they're young, so the seasonality did exist towards the beginning of the time period and it has largely disappeared, and sort of as we're developing the analysis, we might be speculating as to why that might occur. But once I have developed a framework to establish whether there exists a 12-month seasonality for these age groups, it's of interest to understand for these age groups when the peak and minimum mortality might occur in the year itself. So I'm just using a centre of gravity analysis, which is essentially it's just a mean of death in the year, so the mean timing of death in the year, but centre of gravity using circular statistics to allow, say, for example, January to neighbour December, so that we get an accurate portrayal of exactly when death is occurring at maximum rate and minimum rate through the year per age group. And I'm just using Bootstrap to generate 95% confidence intervals. So what you're seeing here is each age group, and this is the month of death within the year, and I've not included age groups which didn't pass the test of having significant seasonality at 12 months from the previous two slides, so that's why there's a gap here and a gap here. But essentially what you're seeing is older age groups dying more in the winter, which is chimes in with excess winter mortality because mostly old people are dying, and that's sort of similar to the younger age groups where there's a slight phase shift by maybe a month or so, and it's similar for male and females. And that's the opposite is true for the men from 5 to 34, where the deaths are occurring more in the summer and least in the winter. So there's there's already a kind of elucidation of what's happening differently within these different age-sex combinations from the first two analyses. But as seasonality is recognised to exist, it would be important to understand what is happening to the relative difference between maximum and minimum, i.e. the percentage increase from minimum to maximum. So as that goes through time, are we seeing a change there? And so what I've defined here as seasonal excess mortality from the beginning of the time period to the end of the time period. You're seeing triangles as women and circles as men. The interesting thing that we thought was that there isn't really a significant change in the percentage seasonal excess of mortality for older age groups. So you may read into that various different things, but over the 30 years, of course, the absolute distance between death rates for older age groups has decreased because death rates are generally decreasing, but the percentage change between maximum and minimum hasn't really significantly changed. What has significantly changed, which sort of chimes in with the Wavelet analysis, is the younger age groups are exhibiting an attenuation of the relative difference between maximum and minimum mortality through the time period. And you can see that by the black it's actually just the men, and the black bold outline indicates that it's significantly different. I'm interested into what's happening subnationally as well. So but NOAA in America has defined these different climate regions, and so I took these climate regions and did the sort of analysis again to see is there a geographical pattern. Is geography a driver of any difference, perhaps, in what we're seeing? So I'm looking at month of peak mortality by climate region. So each climate region is about 4 or 5 states, and the colours of these, so you're looking at an age group per map for men here, and you're seeing that generally the picture is quite consistent over the geography. And so blue, we decided for blue for winter and green and red for spring and summer. So you're seeing a fairly consistent picture within an age group, within a male age group here, for example, 85 plus is occurring generally January and February, even though as our average temperatures over the time period are quite different for different parts of the country. So, for example, 9.3 degrees Celsius in the southeast compared with minus 5.2. So there is quite a range of temperature differences for the same timing. So we thought that was interesting, as well as for women. So once again, I didn't include the age groups which didn't exhibit significant 12-month seasonality in the maps, so that's why you're seeing gaps. And generally the picture is consistent over geography. But also I'm interested to understand what may be driving or to examine whether there is a difference in percentage excess mortality, i.e. the difference between maximum and minimum mortality through the country. So am I seeing, is there more excess mortality in the winter, say in the northeast of America compared with the south of North America? And for the older age groups, it doesn't seem like there is much variation. So each of these dots represents a climate region, and each of the circles and triangles represent men and women. And on the x-axis, you're seeing the temperature difference between the maximum and minimum temperature within the year for the timing of the seasonal mortality. And certainly for the older age groups, if you look at the percentage excess mortality on the y-axis, this is for 2013, but it's been fairly consistent throughout the time period. The range of temperatures through the year is up to sort of, there's a difference of maybe 20 degrees, whereas the excess mortality is relatively flat over that age group. For example, 85 plus, or 45 or 75, whichever of those older ones you look at. So this is distinct from, say, European studies which have shown that where you are, so it seems to play a part in exactly how much of a difference percentage-wise there is between maximum and minimum mortality. So perhaps something's working equally well everywhere or equally badly everywhere in terms of interventions. So in summary, I just took you through what I've been looking at in terms of seasonal dynamics in the USA. So death rates in older groups for both men and women are timed in the winter and summer, which is sort of agrees with previous research. For younger age groups, particularly in men, there's a reverse of that pattern. Significant seasonal mortality hasn't really changed in terms of its percentage difference between maximum and minimum in older age groups throughout this time period, whereas it has for younger men. Under 5 years of age, seasonality has largely sort of disappeared through this time period. From around the middle of the 90s, it's largely disappeared. And temperature doesn't seem to be playing, doesn't seem to be much of a driver in the geographical difference. Well, there doesn't seem to be much of a geographical difference between seasonal excess mortality in older age groups, even though the temperature range is very different between different parts of the USA. So, in conclusion, what this study is, what the framework is sort of shown, is that we've made a comprehensive analysis of different age groups which hadn't, as far as we know, existed before in the USA in relation to age, sex and geography. Up to now and into the future, there will be important interventions which can be made for older age groups in terms of reducing excess winter deaths. That's a target that's been stated by many different papers and governments and bodies, that there needs to be more targeted interventions going forward, including new techniques which can be emergent through newer technology. So hands-free communications devices such as these little Amazon devices you may get, which may improve the feeling for older people that they're connected with the world, especially in months like the winter months. Personal sensors may play a part in that. And these interventions will be important into the future. So I think that's it. So thanks.